Okay, hey there everybody. Lone Outlander back with you again. We're going to do a little bit more work with Derek today and take a look at kind of how we go through some of the extra materials beyond just the text that we dealt with. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and go into my my dialogue here. I'm going to grab his text that we already pulled. Oop, didn't mean to grab DC Addict. I'm going to grab the other one, DC Derek. And I'm going to grab the PA version that we've already worked with. So you can see here we've got all of our info. I'm going to go ahead and set my predefined language for message so that all of my variations for the formatting can kick in. Something that you may want to do is just read through and make sure that everything looks good before you keep moving, just in case you accidentally select the wrong variant, as I did selecting the wrong text document just a little bit ago. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go into the commented one first, and I'm going to go ahead and collapse a couple of things. I don't need the start, and I think we've worked with all of the nodes so far, so I'm going to go ahead and collapse those, get those out of the way. If anybody knows in SVOL how to quickly collapse all nodes, that would be pretty handy. Let's see, skill on pproc is empty, so we're going to close that. Script overrides. So this is from the description. I talked to Austin about this yesterday. I'll go ahead and pull up the document real quick. The commands.txt or commands.doc rather, really handy piece of documentation if you're working in SVOL. Gives you a lot of information about what's going on inside the scripting. So big call out to Jeremy Barnes and Jesse Reynolds, who are the two guys who were flagged on the original commands document. So if you go into the unpacked F2 scripts, if you look under the docs folder, you will see this item. So I went ahead and kept as much as I could from the original, but I did note that it was a 2.0 revision, so that way you could see there were some changes. Previously, they had not had borders on the cells of the table, and it was also written in Word 95. So there were some formatting things that I wasn't terribly happy with, so I wanted to go ahead and clean it up. So here we have the method's name listed in bold, then we have the parenthesis, and the parenthesis is going to give us the method return. So it's supposed to be returning an integer in this case named script. So int is the item. And then we also have, here we have one that says void. Void means that it doesn't actually return anything, but it's manipulating a particular item that in this case is called inven. And then below that, with this second entry, we can see that we have some parameters that are being passed in. So we would feed add object to inventory a who parameter and an item parameter. So if I pull up SVOL here, let me slide it over to the right just slightly so we can see it. If I go to the top, I'm going to go ahead and just go into a blank space here, line 5 or so. If I start typing in add object to inventory, you'll see here that it gives me a tooltip talking about what the method involves. And then I'm going to go ahead and open parenthesis, and it's going to give me an object pointer of who and an object pointer of item. So I'm going to go up here and just do a quick declaration. Object pointer who, object pointer item. So then if I go here, I can type in who and item, and I can finalize that line. And essentially what that's going to do is add the item that I list here in the second parameter to this particular character's inventory. And the thing I like about SVOL is that, of course, it tells us this only works with items, so you can't do this with any other object. Okay? So this is just a really helpful piece of documentation that you can use in order to make your life a little bit simpler while you're trying to work with SVOL. And SVOL, of course, is going to give us a lot of the highlighting and stuff that we already see here, so that's all good. Trying to see what the problem is. Can't open include file. Oh, so this is kind of an important aspect. So with DC Derek, I believe if I go here to my, let's see, there should be one of these that I can grab. Nodes flowchart. I think this will work. Okay. So in dialog over here on the right, we can do nodes flowchart for this particular character, but it requires that there be a message file in the same folder. So if we go here to this one, I believe I actually moved this one. If I go to nodes flowchart, this is what it pops in. So we're going to go to, let's see, new. Okay, here we go. And this is actually the map that it tries to give us to list everything. And you can see, of course, that Derek is not a terribly complex character. We have 10 dialogue nodes, and then the unused node up here that is strictly used for combat, 998 of course being combat. And then if I zoom in a little bit, let me go ahead and scroll here. Of course the navigation's a little bit funky. You can see the individual text of each item that is being included. So we can take a look here at the original talk pproc in order to generate the start dialogue procedure. Now this may be helpful if you're having a hard time figuring out where the original greeting is for this character. So if you meet them at X or Y particular time, how do we find stuff out about what they're doing? So I'm going to go ahead and slide their nodes over right here so we can take a look at what's going on with Derek's talk pproc node. So the first thing we see is that if the game time hour is less than or equal to 0600 and greater than or equal to 1800, so that means between the hours of 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., then we're going to go ahead and call node 1. That's going to be his primary method of contact. Other than that, we're going to go ahead and check global variable 371 and global variable 446. Then we're going to jump straight to node 10. So if I pull up my documentation for this here, we can go ahead and take a look at node 1, ambient float dialog here. If it's between, again, 6 p.m. And 6 a.m., so it's nighttime, we can see the float dialog here on the right. Excuse me. So this is going to tell you that, I'm too tired to talk. Get your own place to sleep. I'm bushed. These are all things that say, this is nighttime. This is not when Derek is going to be very helpful, as if he were very helpful at all anyway. All right. Now the alternative is global variable 371. So I'm gonna float down towards node 10 and see if we can identify where the gvar is for that. So I'm gonna go ahead and go to look for that. There's gvar 446, which is one that we talked about here with a bitwise and of 256. So gvar 446 is what sets Derek talk. And then let me go ahead and grab my gvar sorted. Data dump here, Project Arroyo. Here we go, gvar sorted. So I'm going to go to 371. That's the other one I want to look at here. So 371 is Den Becky job. And remember, of course, the global parameters that we have for these variables are going to be ones that we can see across different users. So, not users, but NPCs. So if we've talked to Becky, this switch can be set, and then we can check the gvar list to see if it's been activated. So, if Becky job is set equal to 2, and gvar 446 is bitwise ANDed with 256 and is not 0, so that means that if we bitwise ANDing, for those who don't know, is using a logical comparison where 1 and 1 make 1, everything else makes 0, but normally it gets carried over kind of in an addition state. So if we say 1 and 1 is 1, then you can set that over to 1 and 1 makes 0 and carries over to the next one. Bitwise operators can get a little funky. If critter stat dude object 4. Okay, so this is going to be, I believe, in one of our defines, but I think it's set up in correct special order. So SPEC should be charisma less than or equal to 3. If our charisma is less than or equal to 3, then that means that Derek is going to call node 10, which is our general dumb floats. Hey, get away from me or don't touch me. And then we have another else. If your charisma is greater than 3, then we're going to go ahead and check global var 446, and we're going to bitwise AND it with 4 instead of 256. If we're in dialogue 0, then we go ahead and start dialogue. We're going to go ahead and go to dialog entry 904. Remember last video we talked about how this is his message list ID, number 904. Self object, so that means Derek is going to initiate dialog for himself. And then we have gsay start, and we're going to call node 5. So node 5 is over here. We've got our line 270 as our start point. So let me roll down to node 5 and see what that says. Oh hi again. Okay, so oh hi again would say to you, we've met him before. So some of these variables, some of these dialog pieces deal with, have we met the player before? Have we talked to them? Or have we met the NPC in this question? So that set Derek talk, there again, we're going to have that variation come in. If we can't call node 5 in the gsay, we can call node 5 down here in the else begin. And then if we're in dialog 0, meaning the dialog is not active, we can turn dialog on, start with the same operation, except now we're going to do node 4. So this is where we're going to set gvar 446. We're going to set Derek talk. So this is the predominant means of accessing. So you can already see I've put greeting node here in the comments, but we can follow the dialog of talk pproc in order to determine where a particular character is going to start talking to us based on a particular set of conditions. So again, the big thing is that we have an exclusion condition at the very, very front. So the, between the hours of 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., he's sleepy. He doesn't want to talk to you. So if that's the thing, we want to make sure that we get to know as quickly as possible so that we don't have to cycle through all the conditions to get to that one. Whenever you're crafting if statements, you always want to make sure that you get to know as quickly as possible. You want to use what's called reductive design, so that way you get to that exit of the loop. Because the more loops you have to walk through, the more loops you have to run, the execute time, or what's called the big O notation, is going to take longer and longer. So we're going to get down to node 4 predominantly here in this lower, this middle third, if you will. And then we've got all these ends. It's always important to be able to identify where the if and end and else and end is going to follow. In some programming languages, like with Java, you don't have an end before you call else. You just have if, and then there's the then, else, and then you begin and end. So the if and the end would then be bookended. Thankfully, if you're using something like Sublime Text, or if you're using a different type of IDE, you're often going to be able to have that parameterized for you, so you can see where the ifs and ends should line up. So if we look here at like map pproc, for instance, you can see the indentations help you to line up where something's going to go. All right, so we've got an else begin here, and again, we want to pay attention to where the else begin is fitting. So I'm going to go straight up from this to the indentation. So we're going to assume that if we have an else statement here, with the critter dude, and then we've got our variable here for 371 equal to 2 and 446 bwan 256 is not equal to 0. We're going to do the same test that we have here in this line, the 446 bwan 4 not equal to 0. So why do we have a duplicate condition? Well, because here in line 5 we have a compound condition. Again, we're talking about and, the logical operator and. And we have to make sure that we understand this is not the same thing as adding. So if we say 1 and 1 in logical terms, that's not the same thing as saying 1 plus 1. As if we're talking about and logical operators, we're talking about binary logical operators for 98% of the time. So the idea here is that that first if is going to be the less common condition, because we have to have both gvar 371 equal to 2 and gvar 446 bitwise and 256 not equal to 0. And I know that when I say them quickly like that, it sounds like Greek, but you could very easily just say gvar 371 and gvar 446, and you don't have to necessarily identify their conditions, unless, let's say there's one where the gvar 446 is the same, but the 371 is set to 1 or set to 0. If you have something that's really, really close, then yeah, you might want to be a little bit more diligent. But in general, what we're paying attention to is we have two conditions. That's first. That's most likely to get us a no. Because remember, if we have a no here, we're going to skip all this text, and we're going to get down to the next else that matters to our particular insertion point in the code. And then we're going to go ahead and do that bitwise and on gvar 446, which I believe is the Derek talking. We've spoken to him before variant. Then we're going to call node 3. Okay, so node 3 would be ambient dialogue, kind of talking to him about his, he talks about his kind of mental instability. So you can see, the paranoid stuff, like, shh, they're everywhere, or make them stop. Some of this stuff, if you're implementing it, you may want to be a little bit more specific about the triggers, to where if he's predisposed to be nice to you right now, then maybe he won't be quite so aggressive. But that's entirely at your discretion as a dialogue editor, and of course you'll talk to Randy and to Austin to make sure that everything is square with those. All right, so the last in our little else chain here is going to be call node 2, and this is going to be called what's known as our default case. So if everything else goes wrong, if we don't have any of these other conditionals that work, we're going to call node 2. So this is from before Quest 2, which is what I assume is the book thing. We haven't really gotten to know Derek yet. We don't have these things set to go. It is just some floats. So we can see him just kind of complaining about why it's hot and why we live in the desert, and he doesn't have his own kitchen. He's getting screwed over, and he's not fond of Fred. And he's also kind of protective of Metzger, so that's an interesting one. And then at the very end, if we get all the way through the if-then-elses, we do have a variable that gets set. So that's going to be local variable 4, lvar 4. We're going to do a bitwise OR with the number 1. So whenever we're doing an OR, we have to remember that, if we have two conditions, if either of them are true, the entire statement becomes true. If you say the grass is green and the sky is blue, both of those statements are true independently, which means they're true together. If you say the grass is green and the sky is green, you better be on Venus, but at that point you won't have grass because of the acid rain. But the idea is that at that point, because you're using and, if either of those two pieces is false, we're going to discard the whole statement. With an or, the inverse is true. If either of those pieces is true, the whole statement becomes true. So the bitwise or means that regardless, we're going to have an additional comparison with that. So let's look at his dialogue real quick here, and we'll see, I believe, where is my local variable for old Derek? So let me see. lvar for Derek. If b1.2, there's got to be something that's a declaration for that. So let's go to, I'll go ahead and highlight this. Do find, and I'm going to go ahead and search. Okay, so we've got set lvar 4, lvar 4, lvar 4. Got a couple of initiations here. Let me see. I may be able to. Here we go. I've got a commented version here. So these are just some flags that we're going to set for Derek. I'm not sure exactly what it's doing exactly, but the idea is that we're going to use this lvar flags insertion, and we're going to do these comparisons in order to, I'm supposing, set it into a particular configuration that we have or have not spoken to him, that we are or are not in some sort of positive or negative interaction with him. So I just wanted to kind of show you that to see where everything was, simply because this is how the dialogue sequence is going to look to the compiler. But it doesn't show you everything, so I want you to be aware of that. These are going to show some origination points as well. So if we have a situation where, for example, node 6 is only accessible through node 4, we can use that in order to make the mind map a little bit more readable. Or if node 5 only comes from talk p proc, or node 7 only comes from node 6. So we can look at some of the routing here. You see node 8 is a little bit different. We have 3 different potential sources for this. We've got node 4, node 6, and node 5. So we have some different origin points for that particular item, which means that we've got some branches that can lead to that as per usual. And then we have, node 9 only comes from node 5, so that tells us some information about that. Node 10 only comes from talk pproc. So some of these little origins and pieces can help us to understand what we're looking at. So if I move this around just a bit, make it a little bit easier to read for me, slide that here, slide 5 up, 9 around, put 10 over by its lonesome. This is just to make my life a little bit simpler in terms of visibility. So I'm going to slide 998 over here because it's not technically being used for any kind of dialogue. Doesn't mean it's not used, period. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of reasons why Derek would want to smack you around, but in this case we're not dealing with that aspect of his personality. Mr. Kooky himself, old Derek. Okay. And again, there are some different puzzle games that I've seen that are very similar to this, to where you're trying to kind of untie all these knots. But I'm just trying to illustrate to you where a lot of these loops can kind of be untangled. You can pull some of the spaghetti out of the way, if you will. So you can see that these connectors flow a little bit differently. Of course, I would probably like to move these up or down, but I think they're automatically sorted. But you can see here kind of the flow of dialogue. Node 1's by itself, node 10's by itself. Node 5, not sure why it has, it does have 2 origin points. Jumps over here, and you can get to 8 from there. Get to 9 from 5, and then 6 and 7 are kind of sitting over here by themselves, coming off of node 4. So there's some pieces that are a little bit more digestible if you look at them in a slightly different configuration. Now what I'm going to do, in order to give myself a reference for this a little bit later on when I make my mind map, is I'm going to go to save flowchart as image. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go to my original source. I'm going to go to data dump, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to, go to my source folder here, Fallout, Rodeo, data dump, and then I'll go ahead and do new folder, and I'm going to create one that's called dialog flowcharts, just to make it easy for me to find it. And I will type in DC Derek as the name. And now I've got my little graphic. So if I close this, go here to my update, it's creating the file for me. Should be there in just a second. I may want to jump the gun a tick. Let's go to data dump, flowcharts. There's DC Derek for me. Now this is done with a transparent background, so bear in mind that if you have a dark mode turned on for Windows, you're going to have some difficulty seeing some of it. But thankfully the threading is pretty good to track where everything's moving. You can see that they can identify blue options versus red options. So blue is going to be GSay in this particular instance, and then you've got red going over to these GIQ options. So a little bit of color to cross indicate, but handy to have. All right, so I've got my DC Derek flowchart, and I'll probably tack back into that later. The other item that I wanted to look at for Derek that would make my life a little bit simpler is figuring out his quest, the whole situation with Becky and the book. So I'm going to go ahead and close up a couple of these items. All right, so let's go ahead and look at timed event P. So if fixed parameter is equal to timed event wander, we're going to go ahead and move through. We're going to go ahead and set a basically pacing, moving back and forth, so that way we see that he's kind of agitated and we can talk to him. Now he won't give us anything good between the hours of 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., remember. When we enter the map for the first time, we come onto this part of the den. Derek is going to be part of 2 teams. We're going to do a trait for the den addict team and then a trait for the AI team addict. And we notice that addict is not generalized by a location, so that's going to allow him to inherit 2 sets of behaviors. We're going to go ahead and add a event sequence here, random from 10 to 60 in terms of the length of time. If we hover over the flush add timer, we would normally see the target. We've got the time value, and then we've got the timer event, which we have up here. On map exit proc, there's not going to be anything that we do. If we can, as the critter in question, see the player and we're hostile, we'll go ahead and attack him. If the damage source is the dude or the player attacks Derek, it's going to be set personal enemy, meaning that he's not going to want to deal with us. If you try and steal from him, which is what the pickup P proc one usually originates from, if the player is trying to steal from Derek, it's going to trigger node 998, which would cause him to initiate combat. Remember, node 998 is going to be combat. Now here's talk P proc. So if you'll remember from our examination of the dialogue in the original SSL, that will obviously give us some insight into what's going on here. So where is, I have my stuff open. Okay. So you see him talking about, like, I'm looking for Becky's book and all that stuff for the quest. So let's go ahead and look at the talk P proc comparison. If it's nighttime, then we're going to go ahead and begin calling node 1. If Becky job state, Becky job book, and Becky work, then begin. So remember we talked about in the node those gvar comparisons. So let me go ahead and pull the node for that real quick. Where's the flowchart? There you go. So I'm going to go ahead and slide that to the side. I'm going to zoom in just a bit to make it a little bit easier to modify across. All right, so we can see a little bit of comparison between the two to make the, if game hour less than or equal to 0600 and greater than or equal to 1800. So this is a compound statement that can be unified into one variable, meaning night. So if night, then begin. So we can see that compounds there. Becky job state, Becky job book. Okay, so that's global var 371 is equal to phase 2. So that means that we've gone from introduction, we've been assigned the quest, and now we're actively looking for the book. And then Becky work is the global var 446 with the bitwise and here, identifying that we are working for Becky, I believe. If dude is stupid, which I have to assume means that we have an intelligence deficit, which means that I maybe have read the wrong stat earlier when we were looking at dude object. If special is read from 0 instead of from 1, then SPEC I would mean that stat 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 would be intelligence. So that means that critter stat less than or equal to 3, meaning intelligence below 4. So that would make more sense. We're then going to call node 10. So if we're in Neanderthal dialogue, we're going to trigger node 10. If Derek talk, so we can see global var 446 bitwise and 4 does not equal 0, meaning that Derek talk has been set. There we have our start dialogue, jumps us there. So we can see that there is a little bit more information involved in some of the text, depending. Now if we flip over to the other gvar that we've got here, I need to find the talk P, here you go. You'll see that it looks a lot like what we have here, because it's the same thing essentially. So where you can, this commented version, slightly more high level, is going to give you some idea of what's going on, unless you go through like Oxhorn's videos and actually watch all of the playthrough. So we want to be aware of that. Strangely enough, even though Derek is an addict, and generally drug addicts are not painted with a gray brush in the Fallout universe, they tend to be like addict bad. You know, they are considered, Derek in this case is considered a good critter if you kill him, which means that the total number of good critters you've killed will be incremented if you do, and then Derek will be set as dead if we use the destroy P proc node. All right, so that was pretty much what I wanted to look at here, just kind of a comparison between the commented SSL, the non-commented SSL, and what the node process actually looks like. And again, I mean, you can do the node variations and stuff for some of the more complex items, but it tends to get really, really messy if you do that. So I'm very hesitant to bring that in. What I may also recommend is that, you know, I obviously used the descriptions that were already present in the dialog file from when I first got it. So copying and pasting those in was not terribly difficult, but I want to be able to give some greater detail on that side. Okay, so for example here where we have the dialog for triggering talk pproc, if I scroll down a little bit to call node 10, I can very easily just identify player is Neanderthal, int less than 4. That might be helpful there for calling node 10. Node 5, you know, next time we can see here from if Derek talk, so accessed if Derek has been talked to before. Derek talk has been set. Okay. And then I've got Derek talk has been set also on node 3. Having talked to him, I'm going to go ahead and put talked in there as well. And then at the end of talk pproc, we have the set here before, so we see that in the look at pproc as well. I'll go ahead and put a quick comment here. Here before is also set at end of talk pproc. Why am I going so far over these procedure calls as opposed to just the dialog? Well, because when we have a quest, most of the stuff in the dialog file is just going to be dialog-based triggers. So unless there's a dialog piece like we see with look at pproc with lines 100 and 101 and description pproc with line 150, you're not necessarily going to get that information. So if we went strictly based on the stuff that was here in the dialog section, we wouldn't be able to pull that up. All right, so now I've got the SSL together. Let me go ahead and pull up FreePlane, and I'm going to do a mind map for us. Let's see. Not sure. There we go. Not sure why I wasn't triggering for a second. Okay. There we go. All right. So it's thinking. It's thinking. All right. Here we go. This is the map I was doing for Casey Sulik. So if you remember, the amount of detail involved is pretty significant. Remember the nodes that are able to be kind of chained together. We saw some comparison of that in here, where we saw that there were some nodes that were only accessible from particular origin points, so we could kind of chain the dialog together for that. So what I'm going to do here is go to New Map. I'm going to use my standard 1.6. I've got map 1, and I'm going to go to Manage Styles, apply map styles from, and I'm going to use Sulik because I'd already set him up. And then I'm going to reset that. I have my root. There we go. And I'm going to change the name to DC Derek.ssl. Okay. So I'm going to pull up my dialog here. I'm going to go up to the top, go ahead and save what I've got. And I'm also going to use the Alt-0 key press to go ahead and fold everything so I know what I'm putting in. So I'm going to hit Insert to do my first level 1 node. And I'm going to type in look at pproc. And I'm going to put in my method call, of course. And I'm going to hit Shift Enter in order to go down to the next line. I'm going to put in a little dash called when cursor floats over character. All right. Now you can either in FreePlane you can either go ahead and hit Enter while you're already on that particular hierarchy level, or you can go to the original point and hit Insert. I don't like doing the insert because, as you can see, it puts it on the opposite side. So I prefer to do it to where I keep these siblings listed on the same side. I like them to branch outwards to where if you rotate it at 90 degrees, it would look like a tree. It tends to make it a little bit easier to read. Now I'm going to do description pproc. Okay. And again, I'm going to go ahead and put active examination, look, command. And now I'm going to go ahead and go into node 0. I'm going to copy what I have there because I'm going to use that for all the others. 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4. Now you could have had 00 for all of those and then just, slipped one to the left on the cursor and stuck in the 1 for the last one. It's really your preference. It's very rare that you're going to have a node count that's this short. So it's important to kind of understand that, this is breathing some rare air here. So I'm going to go ahead and expand node 10. I'm going to work from the bottom up. I'm going to go ahead and hit insert, and that's going to give me my next level down. I'm going to go to set Derek talk. I hit Shift Enter in order to give it a line down. I'm going to type in random L320-321. Okay. Now something I want to double check is that with these there's no target for the next step. So if I go down to node 10 and I go here, it's just a standard floater rand. So what we want to look for are any response lines that will give us a next target node. So this is going to be Shift Enter float / ambient player int less than 4. So I'm just going to add some stuff in that little description there. You'll notice that the color coding is already done for me. Now there are cases where this may have to change depending on how I set these things up, but in this case it's set up like this. I've got my node as being just kind of blank. My node level 1 in yellow with a bold black text, red background for lines from the NPC, and if I insert another row down, so I'm going to go ahead and do PC dialog here, just as a scrap, you can see that it's light blue. So I'm trying to identify areas where things may happen based on their color. If I insert another layer down, I'm going to do if, then, else, for just standard reparative dialogue. For that's going to be for code. That's going to be for conditionals. If I go a layer down beyond that, that's my debug message layer. Okay, so that's just how I've done it. You can set it up however you like. If I go to edit styles, I can show you what all of those look like here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and remove this branch because it's not necessary. Something I do like to make sure that I do is to, you go to your root node, press right one time while holding the shift key, right click and go to always unfolded. Because as you're clicking and moving through them, you don't want them expanding and contracting while you're trying to edit them, which is not fun. Okay, so now I'm going to go to node 9, F2 to edit, shift enter, more bread from 5. I might put N005 just so it makes more sense to me, but again, you're trying to communicate something that's fairly universal. The idea of from a node makes more sense. If we're talking about node 5, we can see here that we've got next times. We can see bread from node 4 into node 6. So if you want to get more descriptive, if you want to put like bread 1, bread 2, bread 3, indicating that there is a sequence or escalation, that's probably a good call. All right, so from node 005, I'm going to go ahead and insert, do my next step. Set lvar node 9 equal to 0. All right, I'm going to go ahead and do my next layer out, which means I am going to have to change some of the formatting in a second, but I'll wait till I'm done before I start doing that. I'm going to go ahead and go back here, and I'm going to copy lvar node 9 because it's kind of awkward to type. Paste it in. While it's less than 3, I'm going to go ahead and do shift enter reply 300 plus lvar node 9. That should be 9. It's listed as 8 here, but I think I just mistyped it. Let me double check. Yep, node 9. So I'm going to go ahead and go to 9 here. And what this means is as you talk to Derek, it's going to increment each time. So the first time you speak to him, it's going to be 310, 311, 312. Change that. You can tell I copy and pasted a couple of these. So I want to make sure, again, you always want to make sure you double check your accuracy as you're going through. So it's going to reply 310, which means LVAR 9 is 0, which is our initiation point. And then we're going to have 311, which is going to go to 310 plus 1, 312, which is 310 plus 2. And then when we get to the increment down here, LVAR node 9 plus plus, then we can go ahead and say, let's go ahead and spit out what we've got. Then we've got the plus 1. So I'm going to go down here to next line down, LVAR node 9 plus plus, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just kind of indicate what's going on. L310, L311, L312. Okay. Now, as I said, I'm going to have to change the formatting a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and change this to where it's red because this is where Derek's dialogue is going to come from. So remember, that's level 2. And this is going to be a conditional. It's going to be a set, so I'm going to go ahead and go to level 4, which is going to clear it and make it just look clear. It's going to be white. Okay. So once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and hit insert, and my responses are L313, target node 999, or L314, target N999. Both of those are ends, so I'm going to go ahead and hit the stop sign right here, put that in, and then if you want to, just for a little bit of extra indication there, I'm going to go ahead and put end at the end of the nodes. Okay. Now this is because its PC dialog is going to be level 3. So I'm going to have to slide that back. Okay, so level 3 is now set. We've got our control flow for node 9. Okay. Something you want to be aware of is that if the flow gets messed up, like let's say that for whatever reason you accidentally drag this like way up here and you don't want to do that anymore, you can go ahead and right click, go to Control R, and it'll reset the node position. You can also right click here. Don't drag when you right click, by the way. So that's what I'm doing here. Go to Sort Children, and it'll make sure stuff is alphabetically sorted so it's easier for you to read. Be careful about doing this if you have if then else statements, especially if you've broken them up in multiple lines, because then, you know, if is not alphabetically before else, so all of a sudden your if then else structure is going to look a little funky. So always make sure you're careful about that. All right, node 8. Got a little bit in here. So I'm going to go ahead and do insert. Actually, scratch that. Go ahead and delete that node. I'm going to go ahead and copy this one, just the node, single, Control-Shift-C, and then I'm going to go ahead and paste it in because this is going to be the same thing except for it's LVAR node 8. And you always want to make sure you check this kind of stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and Control-Shift-C this one too. And I like to do these one at a time just so I make sure that I'm not messing up any branches. I'm going to do LVAR node 8 less than 5 this time, and it's going to be 300 plus LVAR node 8, which means that I'm going to go ahead and go from 300 to 301 to 302, and I'm going to do dot dot dot. I'm going to pull this one out. L304. And then LVAR node 8++ increment. Okay. And that's pretty much how we're going to continue going forward. So we're going to go through from node 7. We're going to have a conditional here. This can be if the player is male. And then we're going to have a target there. Oh, I didn't include my targets. So let me go to node 8. It's 305 and 306. So I'm going to go ahead and expand it real quick. And I'm going to copy those. I'm just going to copy them just straight up. And then I'm going to edit the text to where it's 305 and 306. So you can kind of see how the structure works here if I zoom out just a little bit. We can see node description, include something in there to kind of tell you what's going on. Conditionals are set at style 4 for mine, style 2 for dialog from the NPC, style 3 from dialog for the PC. Anything that's going to be an end flag, I like to try and put a stop on. There's a ton of different flags that are available over here on the side, so if you get familiar with those, you can use those to get descriptive. We haven't set a fine line about what they're going to be yet, like which items we're using for which, but I feel like a stop sign is pretty clear. So, but that's about 45 minutes, which is what my last couple of videos have been. So I will stick with that, and I will talk to you guys again next time, where hopefully we will be able to put all this together and have a completed character ready to pass on to the Creation Kit implementers. Take it easy.